Hey folks, today what we're going to be doing is starting the first video in what I hope is going to be a series of development of Damascus patterns. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of start from the basics, and we're going to talk about how to think about developing patterns, the different techniques to manipulate the patterns in the steel, especially when we start looking at mosaics and how complicated those can be. And so what we're going to be doing is starting out by talking about layer count, because that's really the first choice you need to make as you're starting to build your billet. Ideally, you have an idea of what you want to build and you start from there. And so, as opposed to just kind of like putting stuff together and seeing what comes out, which, can also be interesting. And I've certainly done a fair amount of that myself. But what we're going to be talking about is really how to intentionally build a pattern and the different choices that you're going to make, and the different ways to forge the steel to get different looks inside it. So we're going to go to the whiteboard and just start talking about layer count. All right, so what we have here is just a basic layout of a 5-layer bar. The advantage of going with odd number of layers when you're starting to do your initial stack is that as you go, and once you get this forge welded together and kind of drawn down some, you cut it up, and then you can have your bright layer against your dark layer on top and just stack it up to as high as you want. I generally go for at least 3 or 4 iterations, so I'm not just doubling, I'm tripling or quadrupling my layer count. And the other thing you can do with it is you can then flip this over so that you have a larger bright layer and then a larger dark layer, and that'll give you some dynamism in your pattern in the end, right? So you have some more bold dark layers, some more bold bright layers, and it really adds some variety. One other thing that you can also do when you're doing your restacks is cut 4 pieces, reserve one of them, do your next restack, and then add the piece that you reserved back in at that point. And now you have, in this case, you'd have 5 bolder layers amongst your other, finer layers from the restack. And there's a lot of different ways that you can manipulate that and create different patterns, especially if you're doing a random pattern, or if you're looking at a ladder pattern and you want to have some bolder lines moving through that ladder. And that's really the way, that's really the way that you go about achieving that. The other thing that you can do is as you restack this, you can then add another layer of your original starting material. So as this all gets condensed down, add some thicker layers in if that's kind of what you're going for. If you're just going for pure layer count, then you're going to want to cut this into like 4 or 5 pieces, stack those up and forge them down. One thing to keep in mind though, when that happens, when you do that, is if you were to add another layer, and this is going to depend on how tall you stack, because if you stack really tall and start forging down, what happens is this layer in the bottom, what's going to happen is will kind of begin to move in this kind of arching way like this, because what happens is as you forge this down, you'll see that the material needs to move somewhere, and so it kind of pooches out to the sides like this. My marker is horrible, and I promise you that soon I will get new ones. But it pooches out to the side. This is coming in. This material moves out to the side, and as you forge that down, this creates more of an hourglass kind of shape in your layers. And depending on what you're going for, if you're trying to create a whole bunch of layers that you're going to then lay on their side and make nice straight lines, that's going to kind of interfere with that. So it's a thing that you want to keep in mind. You can also use that as something as a benefit to if you're moving into doing a mosaic pattern after that. you can stack it up and now you get a more dynamic shape because you have these lines kind of doing this, and it creates more of like a wave pattern as you go forward. So really, I mean, these are the things to think about. You know, you can also, these don't need to be the same thickness as you go in. You can get some layers. You can double stack your dark layers so you have thinner bright layers, or you know, you can grade it so that you have the layers, both bright and dark, get thicker down to one side than the other, and now you're creating like a gradient or shading as you move forward. So those are just a couple of things to think about as you move forward with your pattern. And really, this is like the very beginning choice that you need to make when you're creating a pattern. Another part to think about it, especially if this is going to then turn into a mosaic, is that, you know, what is the end size of that tile going to be? If you're going to be condensing this down, all this is going to shrink down super small, and then once that you get to that final tile that gets welded up, when you start to forge that out, how big is that? Are you going to expand that back out to? So these are all things to really keep in mind. You know, and we're going to get into some more of the more complicated mosaic stuff as we go on here. But this is just kind of like the beginning of the choices that you're going to need to make as you're figuring out what patterns you want to make. So, you know, if you have any questions, if you have any specific videos you want made about developing Damascus patterns, let me know, and we can certainly make that happen for you. I hope this little bit was informative, and leave your questions and comments, and I'll be sure to get to them.